Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Now, way back in February, I visited Phoenix, Arizona, and I was amazed by how they are building a connected place and tech hub. Essentially, the state was tempting tech talent out of that increasingly unaffordable Silicon Valley and offering a better standard of life to startup founders. Now, during that trip, I was briefly introduced to Heidi Jannenga, and she's the president and co-founder of WebPT. But unfortunately, I was asked to leave mid-presentation to perform an interview that had previously been arranged for me. But I must admit, I felt incredibly rude taking that walk of shame out of the room. But I did my best to make my apologies and reached out to Heidi directly and invited her onto this podcast. Because I found myself inspired by her tech startup story, it was genuinely inspirational, and I think it's something that you would all appreciate. And thankfully, she said yes. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Phoenix so we can speak with Heidi Jannenga, president and co-founder of WebPT. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thank you, Neil. My name is Heidi Jannenga. I am a physical therapist, and I'm also the president and co-founder of WebPT. And WebPT is an electronic health record based in the United States, specifically designed for rehab therapists. So that includes physical therapists, occupational therapists, and speech-language pathologists. We've been around since 2008 when we launched the company. So we're an 11-year-old company, and within that 11 years, we've been able to garner just about 40% market share, which means about 85,000 users hitting our platform and 15,000 practices across every state in the U.S. And all the U.S. territories.
Now, one of the things I love about recording this daily tech podcast is every day we look at a different industry and how it's being transformed by technology. And like you said, WebPT is a leading rehab therapy software solution. But for anyone listening, can you maybe set the scene and tell them a little bit more about the kind of problems that you're solving for your customers and using technology, and what makes you different really from other solutions out there?
So when we first started back in 2008, 80% of physical therapists in our country were using pen and paper to complete their documentation. So if you're familiar with physical therapy at all, or physiotherapy as it's known around the world, when you go to see a physical therapist, it's not like just seeing your doctor. You actually see them for multiple visits, sometimes in a week, definitely in a month, and over a plan of care that sometimes can span months or even years, depending on the ailment that you have. And every interaction that you have with a therapist has to be documented for, liability reasons, also to show progress, to understand what was transpired during that visit, but also here in the States for sure, in order to get paid from insurance companies. And so that burden of documentation is pretty significant compared to, other medical providers. And so as a therapist back in 2006, I was also a clinic director. I was running 3 large clinics, and one of our largest expenses that we were incurring were for transcription and dictation. So we were transcribing notes that would either have to get sent to a physician to provide them updates, or to insurance companies in order for us to get paid for our services. And so around this time, there were many physician-based platforms that had been starting to get instituted. We looked at some of those, but they didn't have the workflow that a therapist would need, which is very different. And so that's why we decided to launch the company. It was really actually supposed to solve a problem that I had in my practice, but when we found out that the 80% number was prolific throughout the actual profession here in the U.S., we decided to launch the company. We were the first web-based application. And again, if you've ever set foot into a physio's clinic, we don't sit behind the desk very often. We're out and about with our patients, teaching exercises, putting our hands on patients. And so having a web-based application was very important as a differentiator for us when we first started.
Now, you have been on an incredible, inspirational startup journey that I think is going to be so valuable to other startup founders that are going to be listening to us all over the world at various stages of their own startup journey. So could I take you back to 2008 where it all began? And can you tell me more about your story as a leading sports physical therapist and multi-clinic director, looking for ways to improve your practice's bottom line, and what actually inspired you to start this journey?
Yeah, so the inspiration for me initially was really born out of a problem that I was having in the practice with this transcription and dictation expense that was continuing to grow, while my top line, which was made up of insurance payments, co-pay payments from patients, and some cash paying patients, that the majority of that was insurance company payments, which had steadily declined over the years. And so, if your top line is starting to either flatten or slightly decline and your expense line is going up, that doesn't equal a good profitable margin for a company. And so you do everything you can to increase the top line, but you also have to look at your expenses. And with that being our biggest expense, that's where I put a lot of focus and attention in trying to find technology to help solve that problem that we were having. And so when we couldn't find anything, the logical solution for me at the time was to try to build something. And I partnered up with a very tech-savvy software engineer who had a history of building enterprise-level web-based software applications. We put our heads together and developed version 1, which was just the documentation piece, so truly solving the problem that I was having. And we started to develop in 2006. It took us about a little over a year to get that first product going, getting positive feedback from my therapist in my clinic. And within the next 6 months, I had some of my colleagues who said, hey, we'd like to try that product. We'd love to save some money. And so we let them try it as sort of a beta, but they actually paid us, which I think is really important on this journey, that we made sure that people felt the value, that they were willing to pay us for our product. It wasn't just they were getting a freebie. Because if you're actually writing a check for something every day, or paying a monthly cost for something, there's value that's being driven from that. And so before we knew it, we had 12 other practices using our platform, and that's when we did the market research and found the 80% number, and light bulbs go off. And so we decided to launch the company in 2008, and here we are today. But it all started from problem solving, right? Which I think is, for the most part, one of the keys to many entrepreneurial successes is that you actually see a problem and build a better mousetrap to be able to get people to see the value in what you're delivering.
Absolutely. And after over 850 interviews on here, that's the definite trend amongst all startup founders as they experience a problem firsthand and go to fix it. Whereas I think it was a long time ago, but there were instances of people looking at technology first and then looking for a problem to solve. But thankfully, we've moved away from that. And like you say, WebPT was founded in 2008. And I believe you went on to close a $1 million Series A funding round back in 2010. So what kind of lessons did you learn along the way that would be incredibly valuable to any startup founder listening who are looking to get themselves in that perfect position for investors and to get that funding that they need to actually progress things forward?
So during those first couple of years, that it's a grind, right? Yeah. You're every month you're trying to get more customers to pay, and we were looking at every month we were looking at our expenses. What did we absolutely need based on the revenue that we made that month? Was it a new server? Was it a support rep? What was it that was most of a highest priority? So you're basically living hand to mouth at that point. And over that first 2 years, we had actually garnered $1 million run rate. So we had a great trajectory. A couple of things happened. So there was some regulatory change that happened within the U.S. that helped propel our momentum forward, in which the Affordable Care Act, which included the HITECH Act, had been passed, which mandated eligible professionals, meaning physicians and other providers, to be using digital documentation or an electronic medical record by 2014. And they were given incentives to do that. Now, we think it was fortunate, but many people think it was unfortunate that physical therapists were not, and occupational or speech-language pathologists were not included as an eligible professional, meaning that they did not receive the incentive in order to adopt an EMR. So all of our growth was organic, but we were helped by that momentum that was happening in healthcare to adopt a digital platform. So you can imagine if you're still writing handwritten notes and you're sending your notes to a physician that referred you a patient, it doesn't bode well for you as a professional to send them over something you've had to handwrite when they, have been mandated to use something digital. And so we kind of rode that wave a little bit, which really helped on sales. So we got to a point actually where we were having trouble keeping up with demand, right? Which is every investor's dream. So even though we were pushing forward, we came together as founders and said, do we want to swing for the fences here? Obviously, we can keep going, but it would be helpful to have some capital to, keep this ember that's now starting to turn into a fire, to actually get that going even stronger. So, I'm a huge advocate of bootstrapping until you get to a point that you actually have a product that actually is showing momentum. We did that, which enabled us to only give away a small percentage of the company at that point, even though we took a Series A $1 million round in. One of the biggest challenges that we had early on, prior to taking our first round of funding in, was convincing people that our small, quote unquote, small niche space, which when we did the market size for PT, we found it to be a $6 billion market. But they considered that small because, as we were going through looking for investment, market cap, total addressable market is something that people always want to know, like what's the opportunity to expand and get bigger. And so it was really hard initially to convince people that, no, we really needed to stay focused on the physical therapy space. It was our core competency. There was so much greenfield opportunity, and we truly had built a hockey stick. And so now as we are, pushing towards this 40% market share number, that question continues to be in our ear. One of the reasons we did that total addressable market now is outside of outpatient, we have a lot of opportunity, which thankfully we've been able to continue to just push and, put aside all those naysayers who said our market size was not big enough. But I think it's really important to understand what your market is and what the market opportunity is, because that 80% number was huge for us, in that we were able to convince people that, I see how that you've got a lot of greenfield opportunity with 80% of people still using pen and paper. That was a very clear marker that we could move the needle on. And so getting over that initial challenge of market size and staying niche, I think in today's market, I think more people are willing to understand the niche, but that was a big thing that we had to overcome in our early stages. And it wasn't just about a check writer. It was about bringing expertise into the company that would help us get to that next level. So not only did we take a round of funding in, we got Jim Armstrong, who is the founder of JDA Software, which is a worldwide known point-of-service software platform that he started in Canada out of his garage, and became a multi-million million market cap company on our board, as well as helping us to find a CEO, which is also a very difficult decision as founders to bring in a experienced CEO to help run the company with us. We get a lot of credit for that decision because it really helped us to, again, keep that hockey stick growth that we had started on that same path.
And how difficult was that for you as the founder? Was it particularly challenging, or you just knew inside that was the right thing to do?
Yeah, it took a lot of consultation with others to put your ego aside and to say, we have never done this before, even though we have had a lot of success and we're on a great path. To bring someone in who really actually might have a little bit more expertise. And what we did actually, once we made the decision, we did some strength finders work to figure out, what are each of us, or the two of us for sure as founders, what are our strengths and what are we missing? And what we figured out was that we were truly missing a processor, somebody who was going to bring in process, more of an operational leader than a true maybe CEO, if you will, and someone who is going to institute, Salesforce for us and an accounting platform that was going to help us scale. And we were lucky enough to find that person. And when we set up the organization, we actually had three people leading the company, which was a little sometimes difficult. We didn't find it difficult, but we had sort of a trifecta, as the team called us, where we had sort of this triangle of decision making, which I don't think slowed us down. We worked really, really well together in making decisions, and we had a very flat organization at the time. So we had divided up teams in which reported up, and then came together to make big strategic decisions together. So it was definitely tough to set your ego aside, but ultimately it was about being humble enough to say, you know what, I'm really good at these things, and we need help in these areas. Our overlap wasn't so much that we stepped on each other's toes and continued to respect each other's domains, which I think ultimately was how we were able to be successful.
And it certainly seemed like a great move to make. I mean, here we are now, over 10 years later. What have your biggest challenges been in those 10 years? And can you maybe tell me how you overcame some of those challenges?
Yeah, there's been many. I was just keeping up with the pace of change within the organization. It truly is, I think, in any startup, is a part of your culture. Like, if you don't talk about change management as part of your culture, it's important to address those things. And we, from the very beginning, have developed a very strong internal culture. And one of the things that we did when we took that first round of funding in, we had about 12 people in the company when we took that round of funding in. And within the next 6 months, we had hired close to 30 people. And so we had more people in the company than we had in the previous, first 3 years of the organization. And we felt this cultural shift. And so we sat around like we did every year at the beginning of the year, kind of a mini strategic planning session, and we asked those 40 people that were sitting in the room, who do we want to be as an organization? What do we stand for? Like, what types of people do we need? And we filled up a giant whiteboard, which we then distilled down into our core values of the company. And what I am, most proud of is that those core values have now scaled with us to where we are today at over 525 employees in 8 states across the U.S. And so that truly had laid the foundation for our growth in how we communicate with our teams through all of these big changes. So that was one of them. The second is really around keeping up with innovation as you start to get bigger, and making sure you're building the right things, and or building or buying, depending on, what you have the opportunity to do, and making sure that you are looking far enough forward to make decisions that are not just reactive, but hopefully proactive, and balancing the reactive and proactive choices that you have to make, so that you're still ahead of the game as you move forward with innovation. And sometimes that's been very difficult, especially more recently, actually, as we've moved into the enterprise organizations and companies, which, become a lot more of a burden in taxing the teams with wants and needs than where we first started, which was the small and medium-sized business space. So that move up market has been a challenge, but again, communication, having the right people to help lead that, and also to be patient, which everyone says it's a virtue for sure, but trying to balance the proactiveness and reactiveness, I think, has been a challenge, and still remains a challenge for us. And then I guess the third thing I would say, as far as a challenge goes within the organization, would be just in terms of our customers. So we call our customers members. We did that from the very beginning because we wanted them to feel like they belong to a community. And in healthcare, healthcare providers are not known to be the most tech savvy. And so moving through the adoption curve, initially, we hit it right on the head. We had a lot of early adopters with the web-based application. They felt comfortable. They were the folks that were doing their banking online earlier than everyone else. They probably had they had gone away from the BlackBerry and were moving into more of a smartphone earlier than anyone else. But then there's this huge, middle part of the adoption curve that is much more difficult to win over. And so having to take a step back when you have so many smart people in a tech company trying to deliver technology to non-tech savvy people, to take a step back and really understand, how does your marketing have to work? And so, again, in that 2010, 2011 time period, that's when we really, and our current CEO, Nancy Ham, actually talks about how we've actually developed two companies for WebPT. One almost like an educational platform, because we had to, that now is this education community that truly now becomes lead generation, because we have become a thought leader in the space around technology, specifically, electronic health record and more, now with data and analytics within the industry. And so the challenge was overcoming the non-tech savviness of our customers and trying to deliver technology to them. And how we solved that was by becoming this educational thought leadership platform that helped empower them to gain the knowledge to understand that we were the best product for them.
And here we are in 2019. I mean, you're now one of the major players in the physical therapy software market. And like you said, you've had to overcome that adoption learning curve there, especially for people that are not necessarily associated with technology. But so what does that landscape look like now? And is technology continuing to transform physical therapy, or physiotherapy, as they say here in Europe?
Absolutely. We've been helping to push that curve, but absolutely, technology is much more available and rampant through the physical therapy or rehab therapy space, as we call it. So that 80% number is now flipped on its head. So 80% of the rehab therapists in the U.S. are using some sort of digital platform, of which 40% are using WebPT. But you now are seeing many more technology opportunities. with, range of motion, being able to do more consistent measurements of range of motion. Telehealth is now a big thing that's happening to help, again, reach more people in order to gain access to healthcare, which is extremely important. And so you're seeing so many more apps that are available for therapists to use for home exercise program. We've actually added onto the front end of our platform a patient retention management, which is like a mini CRM to our EMR, to where our therapists are able to keep in contact with their patients more, so that they aren't leaving their treatment plans too early, or they're continuing to keep up with their home exercise program, because compliance with home exercises isn't the best among PT patients. And so having this ability to use technology in so many more ways and reaching, your average consumer and where they are, which today, as you know, is on their phones. We've had to really continue to progress in that way, and you're seeing that more and more within the healthcare space in general, but for sure in the PT space as well.
Now, you guys are also based in Phoenix. Can you just tell me a little bit more about the tech startup scene in the area, and why you think tech talent is actually migrating away from Silicon Valley and in towards Phoenix?
Yeah, Phoenix is an emerging technology mecca for sure, as are a lot of different cities, right? I mean, it's I say these days, like, what company is not a technology company, right? Restaurants, PT clinics. I mean, everything pretty much is a tech company these days. And so with the need for more technology applications, more opportunities to apply technology, education first and foremost has to be the sort of foundation. And so all of the major schools, especially Arizona State University and Grand Canyon University here in Arizona, have really stepped up early to understand, like, this is important. So having the education in computer science and technology readily available has been great to help get more people who have the education levels to work in companies. And then you have this amazing startup environment in which incubators, co-working spaces, galvanize our neighbor across the street from where we are in the Phoenix Warehouse District, which has become a great sort of atmosphere in which there are many startup companies that are housed here. So you have this ability to have this density of interaction with more startups. It's just a completely different landscape than when we started in 2008. The mentorship now that's available, the attraction of people coming into Arizona. And the state has we have a very entrepreneurial governor in Doug Ducey, who has introduced a lot of legislation that has been very favorable to technology companies and policy changes. Our mayor, Gallego, had been a huge advocate for the city of Phoenix, and again, bringing more density into this area. So I can't say enough about how it has to be a collaborative effort in order to have cities like Phoenix to really sort of be empowered to have this ability to become a sort of a tech mecca, and we're definitely doing that. I think Phoenix has been named the #1 entrepreneurial city for the last 2 or 3 years running, and so we're well on our way to establishing ourselves, which is fantastic. At the same time, I will just say that it also can be, it's now much more competitive. Yeah. With all these, new startups coming up. We're huge advocates for startups. We do a lot of tours through our building. I speak at a lot of entrepreneurial events. But at the same time, I also want to sometimes put this asterisk down below is, hey, don't come steal my people. because, although it's just the market of more new companies coming up is not keeping up with the pace of talent. And so we, as in all over, I think the world, probably there's just this lack of talent of folks in technology specifically, so, computer science and coding, but also in driving businesses, right, especially from a SaaS platform. So software as a service, which is very different than a more traditional company in terms of your recurring revenue models and things like that. So from a financial, operational perspective, growing companies to our size, there's very few people that have done that. And so, we have to keep the electric fences up around our folks pretty well. Also comes back to having a great culture.
Now, we've talked about where you came from and the story behind WebPT, and also where you are right now. But I mean, what's next for WebPT? Is there anything else you can share with us about the future, and also what excites you about your journey moving forward?
Yeah, gosh, there's so much more. We've done some recent work on our TAM, which is our total addressable market, and we've obviously killed it in the outpatient physical therapy, rehab therapy market, which means that clinics that are standalone or that people go to, that you can readily go in and out of on your own, whether they're associated with a hospital or entrepreneurial freestanding clinic. But there's so many more opportunities within our space, whether that's home health, skilled nursing facilities, even acute care, which is pretty much taken care of and dominated by the larger EMRs, but integration with some of those larger organizations to help with our very niche physiotherapy knowledge is things that we're looking at in the future for sure. And what excites me the most is really we have with our thought leadership, we've done now for the third annual rehab therapy state of the rehab therapy survey that goes out to all the U.S. Therapists, and we garnered that, asked them a bunch of different questions to understand more about the industry. And there's so much opportunity that we have. Right now, we are helping at the forefront of trying to empower more patients to get in to see physical therapists. Today, only 10% of patients who have diagnoses that a physical therapist has the potential to see are actually getting in to see physical therapists. So that means 90% of them are off doing things that, may lead to surgery or more expensive sort of outcomes, or, which is sort of the crux that's happening today with the opioid crisis, they're getting pain medications that they end up staying on and getting hooked on and addicted to. And so we are at the forefront of trying to help with technology to empower more patients in working with insurance companies to get them in to see a physical therapist to hopefully mitigate some of the opportunity for opioid addiction or costly downstream services that may not actually get them better anyway. And so using our data, using our technology prowess, we're helping and empowering more patients. And so that's some of the things that really excite me because our touch factor, our ability to help more people, which at the end of the day is why I became a physical therapist in the first place, was to help people. The ability to help many, many more people today with the WebPT platform is just so inspiring. And even at 11 years, I get up every morning and still want to come to work every day with excitement.
Fantastic. And for anyone listening that wants to find out more information about your story and everything that you're doing at WebPT, what's the best way of finding you online, and also maybe contact a member of your team if they just left with any questions after listening to our conversation today?
Sure. So we're hiring. So webpt.com/careers. We have lots of opportunity down here in Phoenix, and we actually have hubs all over the country, including tech hubs in Denver and Boston. So anybody's interested, if you're want to learn more about the rehab therapy industry, we, again, on our WebPT.com website, we have all kinds of blogs and webinars that you can learn more about us and the industry as a whole. And then me personally, I'm on LinkedIn, so Heidi Jannenga, Jannenga. I'm happy to connect with you via LinkedIn.
Well, I love your story of how you've transformed the world of physiotherapy with technology, having experienced firsthand. And I think it's an inspiring tech startup story. But I think at the end of every episode, I always say that technology works best when it brings people together. But you've used technology to empower patients and ultimately help people. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So a big thank you for taking the time to come on and share that story with me today. Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you, Neil. Appreciate the opportunity.
What an amazing journey and indeed story about a woman in tech achieving highly deserved success. These are the stories that I want to hear more of and celebrate on this tech podcast. And I cannot thank Heidi enough. First of all, of course, for forgiving me for leaving her presentation. And also, of course, for taking the time to come and chat with me today. And I got a feeling that Heidi's tech startup story would have resonated with so many of you listening, whether you're in the tech startup scene or out of it. But I want you to share what you found valuable from today's conversation and maybe even share your personal story with the listeners here too. And that's nice and easy for you to do. I've built a platform so we can all get our voice heard. And you can email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, tweet me at Neil C. Hughes, or of course visit my website, techblogwriter.co.uk. And finally, before I go, a big thank you for all your well wishes, by the way. I am feeling much better now after my scare on a plane home the other day. Now, I do have a routine visit with my doctors next week, but I'm sure everything is going to be fine. You're not going to get rid of me that easily. Okay, so a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.